In 1869, workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York, hit something solid 10 feet down. They kept digging and eventually uncovered what looked like a fossilized man, over 10 feet tall, turned to stone. Newspapers went wild. Thousands of people lined up and paid to see the Cardiff Giant, convinced they were looking at proof that real giants once walked the earth. It was fake. A businessman had carved it from gypsum and buried it there himself, just to profit off the ticket line. But here's the strange part. The myth wasn't invented out of nothing. Long before anyone carved a fake giant out of stone, ancient bones far larger than expected had already been pulled out of the ground, again and again, all over the world. So what were people actually finding? Let's start with something real, something that isn't human at all, but explains exactly why the giant myth had staying power. Deep in caves across southern China, paleontologists have recovered enormous fossilized teeth and jawbones belonging to a creature called Gigantopithecus blacki. Based on those remains, researchers estimate this ape may have stood close to 10 feet tall and weighed as much as 600 pounds, making it the largest primate that has ever existed. In 2024, researcher Yingqi Zhang and geochronologist Kira Westaway led a major study analyzing dozens of cave sites across the region, trying to pin down exactly when and why Gigantopithecus disappeared. Their evidence pointed to a changing environment around 300,000 years ago. Forests shifted, food sources changed, and while smaller, more adaptable primates found new ways to survive, this massive ape apparently couldn't adjust fast enough. It went extinct. Here's the detail that matters most, though. Gigantopithecus was never a human ancestor. It was a distant, oversized cousin on a completely different branch of the primate family tree. Humans and giant apes briefly shared parts of the same landscape in ancient Asia, but you didn't come from it. So if giant apes existed but weren't your ancestors, what about actual humans? Did any of them come close to the legends? This is where things get genuinely interesting, and it involves a single skeleton that changed how scientists think about early human height. In 1984, on the shores of Kenya's Lake Turkana, researchers uncovered the nearly complete skeleton of a boy from the species Homo erectus, roughly 1.6 million years old. Paleoanthropologist Alan Walker led the analysis, and the numbers surprised almost everyone. Based on the boy's skeletal proportions, researchers estimated that had he reached adulthood, he could have stood around 6 feet tall, remarkable for a hominin species living well over 1 million years before modern humans existed. You're not looking at a fluke. Homo erectus populations, especially in parts of Africa, appear to have regularly reached heights that wouldn't look out of place on a modern basketball court, all without a fast food diet or growth supplements, just efficient bodies built for covering long distances on foot across open landscapes. That's ancient, but the giant story gets even stranger much closer to the origin of your own species. Researcher Pavel Grasgruber has spent years analyzing skeletal remains from Upper Paleolithic Europe, focusing especially on a culture called the Gravettian, who lived across the continent around 30,000 years ago. His measurements of male skeletons from Gravettian sites revealed an average height that would be considered tall even today, with some individual estimates reaching roughly 6'5". Pause on that for a second. These weren't outliers or unusually large individuals scattered here and there. This appears to have been closer to a population-wide pattern, a group of people who were, on average, taller than most humans walking around right now, over 30,000 years before modern nutrition science, growth hormones, or dairy-heavy diets existed. If you're wondering how a hunter-gatherer group managed that, the answer seems to come down to two things working together: genetics and a diet built around large, calorie-dense game. Gravettian sites are packed with evidence of mammoth hunting, meaning consistent access to enormous amounts of protein and fat during the exact years the human body is building its adult height. It's worth being careful here, too. Grasgruber's own analysis notes real variation across sites and populations, and not every Gravettian skeleton reached those extremes. Average height estimates from fragmentary skeletal remains also carry real uncertainty, since researchers are reconstructing full-body height from partial bones using statistical formulas, not measuring someone standing in front of them. The pattern is strong enough to be taken seriously, But it isn't a single tidy number carved in stone. If you're enjoying discovering how many myths turn out to have a strange kernel of truth buried inside them, hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one. Back to the bones. Picture a Gravettian hunting camp on the European steppe, roughly 30,000 years ago. A group returns from a mammoth hunt, hauling enormous quantities of meat and fat back to camp, food that will be shared, eaten, and directly fuel the growth of every child watching the hunters return. Generation after generation, that pattern repeats. Reliable access to dense calories during critical growing years, reinforced by whatever genetic advantages already existed in the population. The result over time is a group of people who simply grew larger than almost anyone studying human history originally expected. None of this required magic, mutation, or myth. It required abundant food and the right biology, applied consistently across an entire population for thousands of years. Think about how differently that reframes the old stories. Villagers finding an unusually large skeleton centuries ago had no framework for Homo erectus, no concept of a Gravettian mammoth hunting diet, and no idea an entirely separate giant ape had once existed on another continent. What they had was a big, undeniable bone and a cultural toolkit built almost entirely around folklore. Giants in that sense weren't a lie people told. They were the best explanation available before anyone had the tools to ask better questions. And that's really the twist hiding underneath every giant legend you've ever heard. The bones were real. The height differences were real. What wasn't real was the explanation people reached for first. Monsters, mythical races, something supernatural, when the actual answer was closer to biology responding to circumstances. Extinct giant apes on a separate evolutionary branch. Unusually tall early humans, built for endurance, and well-fed populations whose diet pushed their genetic height potential further than expected. You can still see a smaller version of this pattern today. Height in modern populations correlates strongly with nutrition and health during childhood, which is part of why average human height has crept upward over the last century in countries with reliable access to food. You're not seeing giants. You're seeing the same basic mechanism that built those unusually tall Gravettian hunters, just operating at a smaller scale in your own lifetime. The Cardiff Giant was carved out of gypsum by a con man looking to make money. But somewhere underneath that fake, there was a real pattern people had actually noticed for centuries. Every so often, digging into the past turns up bones that are simply, genuinely, larger than expected. Not myths, not monsters. Just biology, given enough food, enough time, and the right conditions to build something bigger than anyone assumed possible. If uncovering the science behind old legends is your thing, there's a lot more prehistory to explore, so make sure you're subscribed for the next one.